Hi, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Inspiration. What does it do for you? What does it do for you? Well, it might seem a funny thing to ask, what does it do for you? Well, it inspires you. But what does it inspire you to do, I wonder? Now, a couple of instances where I've listened to what someone has said about what inspired them and what it inspired them to do. One particular man who probably could have been a good pianist, and he told me that he had listened. He was intent on being a good pianist. He felt that he had talent. He felt that he could be a great pianist. And then he heard a man called Art Tatum. And Art Tatum was an African-American who, I believe, who was not just, he was a genius of the keyboard, a genius of the piano, had a totally, just this incredible virtuosity on the keyboard, could do things which just seemed impossible, that they were jaw-droppers, and that if you'd tried even to remember them when they were over, you wouldn't be able to, because you wouldn't be able to formulate them even mentally in your mind. And he said, he told me, when I heard Art Tatum, I gave up playing. Now, that inspired him to action, which led to complete inaction and giving up. And I thought then, wow, why didn't it inspire you to even to emulate someone who was so incredible that you could only benefit from trying to copy him? Now, I read somewhere that in Japan, in one particular art school, with a particular fine artist who was the professor of painting, his method of teaching was that you copied what he could do. He was brilliant. You copied what he could do. And when you could do what he could do, you were set free to do your own thing. In other words, you had to, used to be known as learning the rules before you break them, and that was kind of what he did there. And so what, I wonder if you have something that you have really wanted to do, and if you have reached some kind of milestone, some kind of crossroads in your life in relation to that desire, that dream, what happened? What were you inspired to do? Were you inspired to give up, or were you inspired to continue? Two other examples that I heard, that I read, where a particularly talented, aspiring concert pianist managed through different contacts to get an appointment with a maestro. And he went to see the maestro, and the maestro was most courteous to him and said, "Would you play something for me?" And he had been told to expect that this would happen, and he played his most spectacular piece, which really was spectacular. And the maestro listened to him, and at the end of it, he said, "Here's what I suggest that you do. Leave the piano and go and find work that you can be good at, that you can have an extremely rewarding, fulfilled life, but give up the piano." Well, the man was devastated, of course, because the piano was his love. But he considered that the maestro must know what he was talking about, and he gave up the piano. And he went to college, and he found that he had an aptitude, ironically, for engineering, which is more a nuts and bolts thing than the whole thing of being an artist and an artiste and a performer. And he became actually well known within his craft as being exceptionally clever and talented. And he enjoyed an extremely successful life. And some years later, at a party, who should he see but the maestro? And he went to the maestro and he said, "You probably don't remember me, but I came to you many years ago and you gave me some very good advice. You advised me to give up the piano, even though actually I thought that I had a great future in it, but you made me see that I could enjoy a different kind of life if I could find something else that I could excel at." And so I gave up the piano, and I have had a rewarding, fulfilling life as an engineer. But then you probably don't remember me. And the maestro said, "Oh, I remember you. I remember you very, very well." He said, "You were one of the most talented pianists that I'd heard in many a year, and would be destined to have an incredibly successful, to use one of my words, a successful career as a concert pianist." The second time that the man had been devastated by what this maestro had said, he said, "But you told me to give up the piano. You told me to give it up and find another job, and I did that, and I've enjoyed a certain amount of time, but my love was the piano. It was my passion. Why would you tell me to give it up?" And the maestro said, "Anybody that comes to me and asks for my opinion will receive the same advice. I tell everybody to give it up." And the reason for that is, in order to be a successful concert pianist, your passion and your conviction must be total. And irrespective of what anybody else tells you, you must believe in yourself. I thought that was quite a lesson to be learned, that you have to believe in yourself. I think the other thing is as well that you have to believe in a good teacher, and you have to find someone not only that you feel is a good teacher and that can guide you in the way that you want to be guided, in a way which is real to you, and in a way which will give you the result that you want. Now, I always think that in order for a lesson to be learned, there have to be a few components, or at least two. There has to be a teacher willing to teach. Now that might seem like a no-brainer, but actually there are teachers out there whose passion is not to teach, whose passion is to discourage. And if you speak to a lot of especially art students who've gone to school and been in elementary school or even junior high or high, and have taken an art course and have been discouraged because their kind of art did not quite reflect what their teacher thought it should be. So it's important to find a teacher that is willing to teach. Now, the next part of that is that there has to be a student who is willing to learn. And I've given lessons in music to people who were not willing to be a student. They were not willing to be a student. They were not willing to accept that there was something there that they didn't know how to do, and they accepted their skill level in another area. And if you listen to this, I hope it makes sense to you. Their skill level in another area was the dominant thing. In other words, that was the altitude at which they came into their lesson. Now, if you're teaching someone and they are a novice at what they do, they're coming in as a child into your area of expertise, which is to be able to teach whatever that subject is. Now, if you're teaching as I have done, where you're teaching someone who is already an accomplished person, an accomplished professional at what they did, they may be coming in, especially students who are later in life, they may be coming in as politicians, as attorneys, as artists, as graphic artists, as computer experts. They may have gone to Harvard, they may have gone to Oxford, they may have $1 million education. But if they're not prepared to go back to being a child within the new skill that's being learned, then they will just quarrel with what you're saying and will not take in what you're saying, and you'll be wasting your time. You have to get rid of those. You have to get rid of them. But for them, what it will amount to is that their biggest obstacle of learning is not their lack of intelligence, it's their excess of arrogance. If they are completely arrogant about themselves, not the subject that they are trying to learn, but about themselves, then it will be a case of, well, wait a minute, I'm already a very accomplished person, and you're treating me like a child. If they're total beginners, it is as if they are children within that area of expertise, and they must accept the baby steps. That's why we take from children and childhood some of the ways of describing how a person must accept their new position in learning as baby steps. So if they don't accept that, you will have a very difficult time in teaching them. Now, how can maybe we are teachers of some kind, how can we learn from that? The same applies to all of us. And we have to be willing to learn. Now, I remember, and it's kind of funny because it does illustrate the arrogance of a young man, in particular myself. But I went to this College of Music, the Military College of Music in Twickenham, and I remember that my professor, Professor Bill Teskey, was the principal trombone of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. He had perfect pitch. He could tell you the note that you were singing without any musical instrument to aid. He just knew what the keys were. He knew, because it's this inherent talent. And I remember listening and being inspired, being inspired in a positive way to a trombone player in, I think it was, somebody reminded me what this guy was, an American crazy band, Spike Jones. Spike Jones used to make a joke with his trombone player, who was brilliant, who could play Flight of the Bumblebee. And I've used this example before because it is funny. A Flight of the Bumblebee, I thought, wow, oh my God, if I could play Flight of the Bumblebee on my self-teach, I would be able to play anything. And I went out and I bought the music for Flight of the Bumblebee, and I marched in to my professor's little study that he had where we had our lessons, and I told him, "Sir, why don't you teach me to play Flight of the Bumblebee, and then I'll be a brilliant player. If I can learn to play that, I would be a brilliant player." Here's what he did. And then he said, "If you open your case and remove your instrument and do not practice exactly what I have told you, you are wasting your time." I never mentioned the Flight of the Bumblebee again to Mr. Teskey, and I was grateful that he forgave me for my arrogance. And I did continue to learn. I followed what he said, and I made great progress. And so I became the student that was willing to learn. And he, of course, was a teacher who was willing to teach. And we had a great time because I was a hard worker, and I used to actually get other guys to let me have their lessons so that I could go in and do even more in any given week. So, how are you inspired? Are you inspired to give up, or are you inspired to go ahead? There was one other success story that I heard, and again, I'm not great on names, but this apparently this lady became known as a great diva of the opera world, and she had already been singing, but she was a seamstress, I believe, or that's what the maestro advised her to do. But she sang for the maestro of the opera house in Milan, and the maestro was not impressed with her, and he looked at her, and she was at that time she was a plain, simple woman, simple-looking woman, a simple demeanour, with no, as far as he was concerned, no great charisma, and he was used to these women who just filled the stage, and he didn't think that this woman would be able to do it. And he said, "My advice to you, madam, is to buy a sewing machine and earn a good living." Well, fortunately for the music world, especially the opera world, she didn't believe him, and she went on to become a great performer, thankfully. So, that's all from me. I've been waffling for, 18 minutes. Thanks for listening. I hope something that you hear inspires you in a positive way for all kinds of things, because going through this thread of life that we all have, some of the things that we learn are multidimensional. You can apply what you learn when listening to someone talk about music. You can apply it to playing golf. You can apply it to playing tennis. You can apply it to playing the trumpet, the trombone, the violin. You can apply it to any of those things. You can apply it to being a singer. You can apply it to being a business person, because you can learn that one thing which I have actually gone and omitted to tell you, and that is that there is such a thing as the warm-up. Now, the warm-up, we always I think, I used to, before I really started watching athletes on the field, when they were there, especially with the Olympics, they were there and they were some of them were about to break records. But what did they do before they did any of the track events? They didn't take their tracksuit off and they did warm-ups. Were the warm-ups record-breaking? No. So they did those just to get into the groove. They did those just to get themselves to the point where they were now rolling. That first part of when you push start a car, the hardest point is to actually get the wheels turning, and then when it's rolling it gets faster and faster and easier, and then finally, bang, it starts. And that's what a warm-up does. So if you're learning to play the guitar or the clarinet, or you're, I don't know, whatever instrument you're learning to sing, or you're learning to public speak, you're learning to do any of those things, first of all you warm up. And the idea of the warm-up is that you throw that away so that you can actually get the wheels turning. This is a foreigner in the Philippines. Thanks for listening. If you've managed to get to the end of this, bye for now.